Welcome back, everybody. We have another complete set presentation. This is actually going to be a vintage set presentation. I'm going back to the 1960s to bring you the 1968 Topps Baseball Complete Set. The set that's most famous for, obviously, the rookies of Johnny Bench and Nolan Ryan, but it's also the last playing days card of Mickey Mantle as he was retired by the time the 69 card was released. Let's jump into it. It starts out with a series of 598 cards across 7 different series. As you can see, the basic design here has sort of like a burlap sap kind of backing to it, which is kind of what makes it stand out really from any other vintage set of that era. A lot of people don't like that in particular, but for me, I've always felt that it kind of really brings a lot of attention to the image. Whereas in like 67 and 69 both really highlighted the photography of the image itself, but it didn't have any borders. Well, they did have borders, but not in the same way that these do, which are much more distinct and thick borders on the cards. So we're going to go through the set, and as we always do, we're going to talk a little bit about the set itself, but also the players that are in there, and also the 1968 baseball season. Starting with the league leaders, these are the league leaders for the 1967 season. So you can kind of see it on these league leader cards there. It's just loaded with Hall of Famers, and these have actually become kind of a popular thing in the last few years because you can get multiple Hall of Famers on one card, and you can get it for less sometimes than the actual players' cards themselves. So, and I've been kind of a fan of these for years for that exact same reason. I love ones you can look at where you have multiple Hall of Famers on the same card, and you don't have a single player that isn't a Hall of Famer, and there's a lot of those in this set. So let's jump into this. Starting with looking at the leaders from the previous season and talking a little bit about the players, we got Roberto Clemente on the very first card, which is awesome. He was a league leader for hitting. That was the NL batting champion for 67. Here we have American League. You're going to see lots of faces here for Yastrzemski on the average, home runs and RBIs because he hit the Triple Crown in 67. So we got Yastrzemski, Robinson, Kaline, all 3 Hall of Famers there for the American League batting leaders. National League, same thing. We got Cepeda, Clemente, Aaron for the RBI leaders. And the RBI leaders in the American League, we have Yastrzemski, Killebrew, Robinson, all Hall of Famers. That's pretty awesome in my opinion. Here's our first sort of, well, we'd had some non-Hall of Famers in the first card, but here breaks the run here, and we get to the home run leaders for the National League. We have Jim Wynn, who is a good player in his own right, featured with Hank Aaron as well as Willie McCovey and Ron Santo. And then we have the home run leaders for the American League. We have Yastrzemski, Killebrew, and then Frank Howard, who is a home run hitter, who's an excellent home run hitter in his own right as well. Now we're down to the pitching leaders. We have the ERA leaders. We have Phil Niekro and Jim Bunning are Hall of Famers. Nobody on the 67 American League ERA leaders, but we do have 2 White Sox players. And actually, I'll be talking about one of those White Sox players when we get to a card of his. I'll talk about my experience with that individual and also with that card. Then on the pitching leaders, we have Ferguson Jenkins and Jim Bunning. American League, no one of note in there for the pitching leaders, although Jim Lundberg was definitely a player in Red Sox history that's kind of popular during that time span, but no Hall of Famers. Then the strikeout leaders, we have 3 again. We have Bunning, Jenkins, and Perry. And then rounding it out, we have the strikeout leaders for the American Leagues. We have no Hall of Famers there on that one, but we have a couple big names in that era for pitchers of Sam McDowell again and Jim Lundberg. All right, so now we get to the basic card design here. You can see on the back too, they have this like mustard sort of yellow backing on there. The set itself actually had a couple different releases too that you'd look out for too if you were like putting these sets together. We have the O-Pee-Chee cards, of course, from Canada. They released those in the entire set too. There you can probably see just where it's printed, I believe, is how you can distinguish an O-Pee-Chee card. You can see whether it says Canada or the United States on the back when you look at the trademark. And then there's also cards from the Venezuelan series. I think this may have been the last year that they actually produced cards that got released in Venezuela, which in my understanding there always were bootleg cards, so whoever was making those then continued to do it through 68. There was a game made by Milton Bradley that featured 77 cards from the set. They have a little bit of a different card stock. They're pretty hard to distinguish. I think those that are really good with those cards can know the difference between the two of a regular Topps card and also a Milton Bradley. They're both Topps cards, and they pretty much hold the same value when you're looking at like the Nolan Ryan rookie, for example. and there were 77 cards that came with that. And then there was a 33 card Topps Game Insert Series, and you see plenty of those available for purchase where you can get like a pretty inexpensive vintage Mickey Mantle by being able to get one of those Topps Game cards, which looks like a lot like the 1951 Topps cards. And it was also featured again in a Heritage set when they did the Heritage version of this in the recent years, where they actually had the Topps Game cards for those as well. All right, so we'll jump through here and kind of point out some of the Hall of Famers, and we'll talk now more about the season itself, because it was quite the season. Here we have Lou Piniella. That's not his rookie card, but he was featured several times on dual cards through the 60s, as he was kind of inching into the majors throughout most of the late 60s. All right, so our first Hall of Famer here is we got Brooks Robinson. The first card I ever got for this set, I believe, was Roberto Clemente, and it was back in the day. I am standing corrected. Actually, it was a Brooks Robinson All-Star, so I'll get to that in a minute, and I got that as a kid, so I talked about that one. Other Hall of Famers that are featured on this first page, we do have Gil Hodges as a manager for the Mets. I think this was the first year he was assigned as the manager for the Mets. This is his first managing card here in '68. Joe Torre, Hall of Fame manager. Billy Williams, Hall of Famer for the Chicago Cubs. Here we have Tom Seaver. All right, so Tom Seaver and Rod Carew, this is the first set where they actually had, not only did they have the rookie, All-Star Rookie trophy on the cards, but they also were the first ones that they had their own individual card, because both the rookie cards for Carew and Seaver, released in the final series of '67, had them as a dual card with someone else. So these are very popular cards for that reason. Also because the rookie cards of those two Hall of Famers in particular are really expensive. So a lot of collectors don't want to go after those cards in particular. So they go after the first ones they can get where they're featured by themselves. So that makes that card kind of a popular card. And mine's in really poor condition because it's actually missing a little bit of a corner here. I put this set together about 15 years ago on a smaller budget. So there's some cards in this set that I would love to be able to upgrade at some point. Seaver being the big one I'd like to be able to get a better copy of. Denny McLain. This kind of leads me into the 1968 baseball season, which was known as the Year of the Pitcher. Denny McLain and Bob Gibson were the MVPs and Cy Young Award winners this season because of how much they dominated their leagues, but also how much pitching in general just dominated all of baseball. Dominated to the point where they actually moved the mound back after the 1968 baseball season because they thought runs and averages had dropped so much that the pitchers had such an advantage that they actually moved the mound back and where it stands currently at its current distance today. Denny McLain won 31 games that season, which is the last time anybody's reached that standard. And it was actually the first time since 1934 that anybody had done it in baseball, and that was when Dizzy Dean did it last. So Denny McLain was truly a superstar of this era, and actually fell in hard times after he started having arm trouble in the early 70s and was never the same player thereafter. So now we have a Willie Mays. One of the things you also want to know about the '68 set is there's 10 cards where they have different versions of them. Ed Brinkman's one of them. I'm not sure which one is more rare, but if you get those 10 cards, that would actually bring the master set up to 608 cards. Unlike on some other sets from the 60s and 50s, if you try to get master sets, it actually gets kind of expensive because some of those big names sometimes have short printed cards in there. 68 is not necessarily the case, and most of actually the errors are actually on the checklist. So I got Willie Mays on there. This is one I've had a long time. It's in a really poor shape, and it's a lower grade one, so Willie Mays would be on the list of actually trying to get an upgrade at some point too. But the back is pretty clean, so it still looks pretty nice for the purposes of my set. '68 was also the last set where you saw Eddie Matthews. This is the last time he was featured. He was on the Detroit Tigers at this point. Actually, he was an active player with their World Series team in 1968, in which they actually won the World Series 4-3 over the St. Louis Cardinals, who the Cardinals were trying to repeat after the '67 season. The star of that series actually was Mickey Lolich when we get to it, because he actually was able to throw 3 complete games, which is the last time that's happened in World Series play, and was not his teammate, Denny McLain. And on the Cardinals side, the star obviously was Bob Gibson, who actually struck out 17 batters in a game in the World Series that season, which still is the record for World Series for any pitcher. So definitely was a series that had some really good pitching, but also had some hitting in it as well. Here we have the checklist feature a player image and all the checklists. So we have Jim Kaat featured on here. For the most of them, I think they all have Hall of Famers. This one obviously being added most recently. And when they would do that, that's because this player is actually somewhat featured somewhere within this series on there. Here we got Tom Truss still playing with the Yankees at this point. To give me one more card thereafter. We have Tommy John down in the bottom there. And we have Rod Carew, as I mentioned, the Seaver card, but also the Rod Carew card has the Rookie Cup here on there. This is a pretty popular image of him in particular. All right. Gaylord Perry, Willie Stargell, Dick Williams, all Hall of Famers there. So it's Hall of Fame row. Rocky Colavito, great player from that era. Only card featuring him is a White Sox. And here we have Bob Gibson. Bob Gibson had an ERA of 1.12 in 1968, which is the lowest I think probably the lowest since in the modern era, but definitely the lowest since they did divisional play for sure. This was actually the last year that they had no divisional play. They hadn't expanded yet. They expanded in the very next year, where they added like Seattle, they added Montreal and Kansas City, and I think there was one other team. San Diego was the other team that was added in 69. In 68, this was still one league versus one league. So the champions of each league in the World Series were actually the ones that won the league that season. Bob Gibson obviously was a very pivotal player for the Cardinals during this era. It was probably their best player during the eras in which they won World Series in 64 and 67 and appeared in 68. We also have Don Sutton featured here. Juan Marichal featured here for Series 2 coming out. Coming up, we have Hank Aaron. One of my favorite cards and such, just because I'm a big Hank Aaron fan. Really great cards. Just love looking at these again. I haven't looked at this in probably a few years, where I've actually gone through each page to look at it. And I just love these cards, kind of looking at the images with these matting in the background. So you can see the matting changed a little bit from one series to another. That's one of the odd things that didn't stay kind of consistent throughout the series. Here's Tony Perez, Hall of Famer. Joe Morgan, still with Houston at this point. Don Drysdale. Don Drysdale actually had a really good season in 68 as well. He went 6 consecutive games where he had consecutive shutouts. We didn't give obviously up a run, which actually set a record until another Dodger broke it in 1988 when Oral Hershiser did that. Here we have Roberto Clemente. One of my favorite Clemente cards is the 68 card. And here we have the World Series that's featured here. You can see each World Series card kind of has like a little TV sort of image in it. There's some Hall of Famers featured within these, where we have Lou Brock. This is from the 67 World Series. We have Yastrzemski. We have Bob Gibson. Denotes that the Cardinals won it. We got Tony Oliva, a newer Hall of Famer. Elston Howard in a Red Sox uniform, which always looks funny to me, personally. Maury Wills not a Hall of Famer, but we got Maury Wills featured on there, which is his second tops card. Within that same page, we have a very off-center card here of Nolan Ryan. This is his rookie card. I can see there's some glare actually featuring in the corner there. Let me move this camera a little bit, or the light, so you can see a little bit better that image. Here's the Nolan Ryan card. This was actually, when I put this set together, I did it, originally started it back about 15 years ago, but I didn't finish it until a few years ago because I took a break. Because I had a hard time justifying the cost of picking up the Nolan Ryan card and also the Mickey Mantle, which I still needed for the set at that time. So I picked those cards up, I think in 2018. Was the time I picked these up, and then I got back into card collecting right at that time and moved on thereafter. So very happy to actually have added that to my collection and into the set. And it actually was the last card I needed for the set, because I believe I got the Mantle first. So that was kind of an interesting story that I had all that together except for that card. And I needed to get that and the Mantle to be able to finish it. All right, moving on here. Checklist with Yastrzemski featured on it. Joe Peptone still playing with the Yankees at this point. Passed away recently. Orlando Cepeda, he'll be at the National signing autographs, I believe, on the final day, as well as Juan Marichal. Can't imagine there'll be too many more. It's nice to still see them showing up and getting out and doing that. In case you wondered, since we already went over the MVPs and the Cy Young Award winners, the rookies of the year were actually Stan Brinson and Johnny Bench. So I haven't had a chance to show you the bench cards. We actually haven't gotten to it yet. And if I missed it, I apologize. I'll come back and grab it. All right. Jim Budding down here. Harmon Killebrew. Dick Allen, hopefully a future Hall of Famer. Pete Rose, also hopefully a future Hall of Famer. Ron Santo. Al Kaline. And here he is, Johnny Bench. Johnny Bench's rookie card. Also kind of off the center about the same extent as my Nolan Ryan card is for whatever reason. The top to bottom centering is bad on both of these, and I couldn't tell you why, but there you go. We got Johnny Bench's rookie card in there, which actually has become a more coveted rookie card in the last few years. I think people realize just how much of a value it was. And then we also have Carl Yastrzemski featured down here. Stats on the back here feature his Triple Crown season of 44 home runs, 121 RBIs, and a 326 average. Phil Niekro, a young Norm Cash. Wow. He wasn't that young at that point, but still looked pretty young. Moving on. Tim Carver passed away not too long ago. Next checklist featuring Orlando Cepeda. And we have Mickey Mantle up here in the corner. My mantle's got a pinhole in it, so somebody put this up on their wall in some ways and pinned it up there. So it would be no more than a 1 if I ever sent it in for grading. But at the time I bought it, oh God, it was before the pandemic, so I think I got it for like 30 bucks. So it was actually a pretty good deal at the time I was putting it together. In hindsight, I wish I would have spent a little bit more and gotten a better copy of it. Because I do like this mantle. I like this image of him. It's one of my favorite mantles from the 60s in particular. Here we got Willie McCovey. Red Shandies, Hall of Fame baseball player and manager for the Cardinals of this era. Luis Aparicio back with the White Sox. He got, I don't know if he got traded or released, but ended up signing after he was with the Baltimore Orioles. He's actually wearing an Orioles jersey in this one, so they do change that by his 69 card. That was his second time with the White Sox. Leon Rocher, Hall of Fame manager. We've got Roger Maris. I've had this card a long time. Got it in not the best condition when I picked it up at the time. Still have that very same one in my set, and I think I got it as a very young adult. I think I was probably in my early 20s. I thought it was cool because it was with the Cardinals at the time, because I was more of a Cardinals fan than a Yankee fan. To this date, I actually don't have a Maris card in a Yankee uniform. So at some point, I'll want to get that one. Probably when I put a set together from the 60s, again, I'll have that featured in there anyway. All right, moving along, Hoyt Wilhelm with the White Sox here. Ernie Banks. Will Horton, a very big player for the Tigers of this era. And here we go. We have the All-Star cards. These are one of my favorite All-Star issues, I think, of all the ones from the vintage era. I just love the image of kind of seeing, maybe 1960 might be a one where I might put it on the same pedestal, but I just love these All-Star cards where they have the really solid image here of it, the close-up typically. Different leagues are featured by colors, and also they have 68 highlighted here with these little stars. Just like the image, and they make really cool autograph cards, which I will show you in a minute. So, and there's tons of Hall of Famers after the 67 season that are featured in 68, which are not always the case when you look at some of the All-Star series throughout the 60s. Here we have Killebrew, Cepeda, Carew, Morgan, Robinson, Santo, Yastrzemski. So like the 7 of the first 9 are all Hall of Famers. And then we have, I can see the pictures on the back are going to be featured, I believe it's Yastrzemski. I'm trying to remember the other one. It might be, I don't remember actually off the top of my head. We'll find out when we turn the page. We've got Aaron, Oliva, Brock, Robinson, Clemente, Gibson. So like 6 of the next 9 are actually in the Hall of Fame. And the last 2, we have Holtzman and Peters, White Sox pitchers. Or sorry, pitchers from Chicago. But the Peters I actually got at the 2019 National here in Chicago. I actually got an autograph from him. So I got a chance to meet him in person. It was one of those value ones you could have gotten for like $30 or something when everyone else is signing for like $70 or more. We have Gary Peters, who you can meet. So I was able to meet him and have him sign the card. He's since passed away at the beginning of this year. But I thought it was really cool to kind of get it signed on the 68 All-Star, just because I like these designs so much, even though I did have his rookie. But I thought it would look cooler on this card, and I'm happy to be able to have it within my binder, within the set collection. The other player was Orlando Cepeda on there. I forgot about that. He was the other one that was featured. We have Jim Hunter, Catfish. We have Hal McRae's rookie card. He was a pretty good hitter up and through the 80s. Bill Mazeroski. Gaylord Perry's brother Jim. Hank Aaron's brother Tommy. Steve Carlton. Fergie Jenkins. Here's Lolich, as I mentioned earlier. Not a Hall of Famer, but definitely in the Hall of very good. I think he should be in the Hall of Fame personally. Petrocelli down there, definitely a name remembered in Red Sox lore. What I did notice about the last couple series, is there's not as many Hall of Famers. Looks like they had a lot of the stars skewed up to the front, so I think probably by the time kids were buying these late summer, early fall, you know, they weren't necessarily like getting a lot of stars out of there, so I don't know if that made them less valuable or not, but the series were not necessarily super short printed like they are in some of the other years. For example, like 66 and 67, where that last series is going to cost you an arm and a leg. Here we got Jim Cott, Mike Shannon, who just passed away recently. I think Frank Robinson's going to be coming up. All right, so when we get to this series, which I think is the 6th series, we actually have combo player cards. Not featured anywhere else in the set, but these common combo cards actually have some Hall of Famers featured on each and every one, and there's actually one that's like a really, really popular card from this set that a lot of people love being able to collect because of who's on it. Here's one that not as popular, but we have a Clemente and also a Tony Oliva on the same card, so that's pretty cool. And then it's called the Manager's Dream card. Here is the Superstars card. This is the one I was kind of talking about. Mine is, again, off-center, top to bottom here if you look at it from this angle, but also, I think from left to right, it's also off-center as well. It features, obviously, Killebrew, Mays, and Mantle, which I think maybe at the time, along with also Aaron, were probably like the active home run leaders, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know that for sure. I'd have to look it up. I think probably Frank Robinson would be somewhere in that conversation. But talking about having Mays and Mantle on the same card, it's pretty amazing, and certainly Killebrew was a star of that era as well. Frank Robinson, off center again. You see a bit of the other card miscut there. Okay, we're getting near the end of this set. I think those are the big things I wanted to kind of highlight. What was also kind of interesting from this era was the Hall of Fame inductees for this season were in 1968 were Kiki Kyler, or I think that's how you pronounce his name, but I was told maybe it was different recently. We also have Goose Goslin, and we have Joe Medwick, who are all the people that were inducted in the Hall of Fame at this time. We have Lou Brock, We're moving into the final series. I always like looking at Tito Francona because he looks so much like, his son looks so much like him, Terry Francona. And his nickname, Terry, is sometimes Tito as well, which I think is interesting. Same nickname as his dad. Here's the Bird Beaters. I guess there is in the 7th series as well, so I apologize that there is combo cards listed in there too. This one we have Robinson and Robinson. I think a very undervalued card. When one you can get pretty inexpensive, but has some great Oriole players of that era. And just great Hall of Famers, in my opinion. We're getting near the end here. Ken the Hawk Harrelson, Hall of Fame broadcaster, actually, for the White Sox, this time with the White Sox. Tony La Russa, Hall of Fame manager. Jim Palmer. Getting to the very end, just a couple pages left. And last but not least, here is the final page. Ending with Jerry May as the final card of this set. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we will see you soon.